one of my favorite journalists is a freedom-oriented journalist, but then he got this big idea that maybe he would become a parliamentarian, and indeed, he's succeeded. Wow, has he ever become a star in that place, fighting for the same values that he did as a reporter? You probably know who I'm talking to. His name is Andrew Lawton. He's the Member of Parliament, let me see if I can get this right, for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South, and what a delight to catch up with him after a very busy first, I guess, half a year. Andrew, nice to see you again. Congratulations, by the way.
Likewise. Thanks very much for having me, Ezra.
You know, one of the things I'm really grateful for is that you have not lost your civil liberties spirit. Sometimes when journalists enter Parliament, they suddenly lose their principles, all the things they talked about when they were writers. I think of our friend Charles Adler, who Trudeau put in the Senate. You, in fact, have done the opposite. You have leaned in to your civil libertarian side and have made that a focus. Why don't you share with our folks who might not be following Parliament closely, tell us about some of the battles that you've faced, some of the questions you've asked in committee, some of the question period stuff. Just for folks who don't know, bring them up to speed, and don't be shy about throwing to clips. If we don't have those clips here immediately, we'll add them a little bit later before we publish this, because you've had some exciting moments. So bring us up to speed. Tell me about the battle.
Oh, well, look, first off, I appreciate it, Ezra. I mean, when I made the decision to run, a big part of my decision was, can I continue to be a champion and an advocate for the things that I've always cared about and the things that I use my platform as a journalist to champion? And I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't going to be able to do that. And that was a key part of why I decided to run in the first place. It was, where can I make the biggest impact? And in my maiden speech to the House of Commons, I actually said that the reason I went to Ottawa was to make Canada a freer country. That was a commitment that I made to myself, to my constituents, and to all Canadians.
Let's have a quick clip of that. And again, the maiden speech, that's sort of, everyone watches that one. Your folks back home watch it. Other MPs, they want to take your measure. Here's a clip from Andrew's maiden speech.
My riding is made up of incredible communities filled with incredible people. And I get to represent them. Everyone, regardless of how they voted. The farmers, the artists, the entrepreneurs, people who have just made Canada their home for the first time, and people who helped settle this country and settled the community generations ago. But it's people in these rural and smaller communities in particular who have felt most neglected by the last 10 years of Liberal government. And it was their struggles that motivated me to jump into politics. As a journalist and broadcaster, I could not spend an election with the stakes so high on the sidelines. I had to have a hand in the solutions. Like most in this chamber, I spent the campaign knocking on doors. I spoke to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in my riding. And I want to share, Mr. Speaker, a few of the stories that have stood out and that I carry with me today. One was a retired teacher from St. Thomas. A woman who said she had voted Liberal every single election in her entire life. And I asked her, why not now? And she said, I just can't. Now, a good politician probably would have taken the vote and walked away, but I asked as a journalist one further question. Why? She said, because my sons are 28 and 30 years old, and they live with me, and unless things change, they're never going to be able to move out. That is one conversation I had that is so similar to countless more. People whose families could not develop and thrive the way that most Canadians dream, the way people in my riding dream, because of Liberal government policy that has made home ownership just a fantasy rather than a dream and an aspiration.
Well, excellent. Now, how have your fellow MPs, and there's some Conservative senators too, how have they reacted to you picking up the torch of free speech? Have they joined in? Have they encouraged you? Have some said, oh, fella, better calm down or something? What's been the reaction?
No, it's been incredible. I mean, we obviously, look, as a Conservative Party, we didn't win this election, but we did tremendously well in terms of our raw vote total. We made inroads in communities that are not used to electing Conservatives. And largely, I think the reason that that was so successful and so important and gives us something to build off of is because we need to be able to have these conversations about what's at stake. And, I was talking about freedoms for gun owners in rural communities and across the country, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. And then we had this really dangerous government bill that was put forward called Bill C-9, which is a bill that, again, the noble intentions surrounding it, as you've been covering, as I was covering as a journalist, the unbridled brazen hate that's been directed to the Jewish community in particular, but also we've seen arsons and vandalism of Christian churches in the last 5 years. There are a number of communities that I think have been crying out for action, but the answer to that was not a bill that censors what Canadians can say. So Bill C-9 has become a bill that I've become very vocal and active on, especially now that it's expanded to remove longstanding religious freedom protections. And certainly the support from my colleagues in the Conservative caucus on this battle has been tremendous.
Now, let me ask you, because when I was young and starting to learn about civil liberties, when I was in my 20s, let's say, I had a chance to meet a fellow named Alan Borovoy, who at the time was the head of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. I think it would be fair to call him a man of the left. In fact, he was pretty progressive, as we'd say today. But he loved civil liberties as much as anyone I've ever met, ever. There was a time when civil liberties used to be a nonpartisan issue, where people on the left and people on the right believed in it. Maybe wokeism killed that on the left, but let me ask you, have you had any of the more high-minded liberals? I don't even want to ask about the Bloc or the NDP because I think I know the answer there. But have any more moderate liberals, more thoughtful, old-style liberals said, hey, Andrew, maybe we disagree with you on a few things, but we love civil liberties too. Have you seen any hope across the aisle on this stuff?
Look, not in Parliament. Now, I'm going to make a division between liberals in the House of Commons and people on the left who are not partisan liberals in Canada, because outside of Ottawa, I would agree there is in general among people on the left and the right an understanding that freedom of expression is important. Religious freedom is important. The right to protest the government. This is an important fundamental right in a free society. And when liberal government, when the Justin Trudeau government was pushing forward the Online Harms Act, a lot of the criticism came from people that no one has ever mistaken for being conservative. People like Margaret Atwood, people like, Andrew Coyne and Neil MacDonald of CBC. So this is where I think we have to draw a line between some of these cultural people on the left and the political left. The Liberal Party right now has been the party that's been advancing these really significant moves away from freedom of expression and away from religious freedom. This was a hallmark of the Justin Trudeau government, and that has been picked up by the Mark Carney government. But on Bill C-9, the condemnation has come from left and right. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the BC Civil Liberties Association, which is even further to the left, have condemned it. It's been condemned by Christians, Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, organizations on all sides of the political spectrum, leaving me to wonder, why are the Liberals still standing by it? And the only reason is because fundamentally, they do not support freedom of expression.
I want to come back to C-9 in a moment, and you're right, it's a concerning law, and I've read through the law, I've talked about it in a monologue, but you've really engaged the government with it. Let's put that aside just for a minute, because I want to ask one more follow-up question about how civil liberties, if it is still something shared by other people. A lot of censorship comes from government, of course, and that is regulated in part by the Charter of Rights, which limits how the government can infringe on our freedoms. However, a lot of censorship, in my observation, these days comes from tech companies, that is private companies, not governments, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or Facebook. Now, Elon Musk buying Twitter and making it very free speechy has changed things. It's really fostered communications and an international conversation. Have you had any interaction with tech companies or their lobbyists since you've come to Ottawa? Where are they on the free speech issue? Because for a few years there, they were really the vanguard of censorship. That's how it looked like to me.
Yeah, I've met with a number of stakeholders. I met with YouTube. I've met with Rumble. I've met with X. I have not had a meeting with anyone at Meta formally, but I've run into people at Meta. And look, the position that I have expressed to them is one that I am firmly in the mindset that we need to have freedom of expression. I have also been very clear on this, that I do not believe government should be regulating what these platforms can have on themselves. But I also want to take a step back here because, I believe that one of the big problems we've seen is when government forces tech companies to not to take a particular decision, but forces them to regulate a particular aspect of what they do. And then those tech companies respond in a way that they're the ones making the decision. And I'll use a prime example of this, which is the Online News Act. The Online News Act did not force Facebook to take news off of its platform, but it created a framework where that was the most logical thing for Meta to do. But if you're an independent news platform and you're saying, well, hang on, now I've been banned from Facebook, the government says, well, don't look at us. That's Meta. Meta made that decision. Well, yes, but they made that decision as a response to government regulation. And I said the same thing when the Online Harms Act was being put forward. If government is saying to tech companies, these are the hate laws in Canada, and you have to figure out how you're going to keep this type of content from your platform, it's going to force an overbroad interpretation by companies that don't want to deal with the government and the government's regulatory regime. So you end up with censorship that is technically being perpetrated by tech companies, but really your beef is with the government. So I think the more we can disentangle government as a content regulator from social media companies, the better it is for Canadians.
Yeah. I mean, we're effectively banned on Facebook. It was a decision because the government would have taxed Facebook for every link. But, whether the government did it directly or or it happened as a side effect, we're still banned.
But you don't have the recourse. You don't have the recourse available that you would. You cannot take Meta to court because Meta would say, well, we're a private company. And you can't take the government to court because they'll say, well, Meta made that decision. So this is the problem when government is basically deputizing tech companies to do what the government really wants to do.